few weeks back, we interviewed Andy Green, better known as the fastest man on earth. Among his many achievements is, of course, breaking the sound barrier in the Thrust SSC in 1997. Andy and what he calls the best engineers in the world now have set their sights on another record, going 1000 miles per hour or 1600 kph in the Bloodhound SSC. Mr. Supersonic was in India for the 2014 IET Lord Austin lecture and we caught up with him. My first question was, of course, about the scale of the challenge.
Well, it's a very good question because, of course, we are going 400 kilometers an hour faster than the previous record.
Yep.
All of that speed increase, it's the biggest percentage in history, and it's all supersonic.
Yep.
So it really is unknown, unproven territory.
Yep.
So in terms of the preparing the engineering, we're of course working once again with the world's best engineering team.
Yep.
A lot of the engineers who worked on the car last time.
Okay.
Separately, of course, there's the preparation of the team and indeed for me.
Yep.
And that starts 20 years ago when I joined the Royal Air Force and fly jet fighters.
Yep.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, there is no better way of preparing for something like this. So the preparation of every single aspect, the detail that's gone into it, to get to 1,600 kilometers an hour safely, you know, I'm very, very comfortable with every single bit of it. Can't wait to get started.
Andy, as part of your preparation, what would be, have you been sitting through simulators? Do you have a fair idea of what to expect, or are you going to take it as it comes?
Some bits
speed.
we can have a very good idea. So for instance, I've got a very good idea what the G-forces will be. We'll be
Okay.
accelerating at 2G,
Okay.
so that's 65 kilometers an hour every second.
Yep.
Be slowing down at 3G, which, you know, if you're not used to that, that's quite a violent experience.
Yep.
3G, of course, is 100 kilometers an hour per second. What we don't know is how the car is going to handle. At low speeds, we expect the big solid metal wheels, they will grip just like normal wheels. They're solid metal.
Yep.
Because they're rotating so fast.
Yep.
So they will grip this mud surface,
Yep.
and as the wheels are going along, 200-300 kilometers an hour, the car will just steer like a normal car.
Okay.
And at 600 kilometers an hour, that's when I also fire the hybrid rocket.
Yep.
So we are now accelerating at 2G, 65 kilometers an hour per second, and I'm fighting the steering to keep the car straight.
Wow.
Let's put on another 500 or 600 kilometers an hour. So we're now doing over 1,000 kilometers an hour. The shock waves now start to form.
Yep.
We get shock waves around the front wheels.
Yep.
130 millimeters of these big discs are
Yep.
sticking down below the car.
Okay.
So they're now generating their own shock waves.
Yep.
They're generating a lot of force from this car.
Yep.
So now, a tiny input in the steering, the wheels change a tiny bit,
Yep.
big correction.
Wow.
So from 200 kilometers an hour, where the car is just, you know, not very responsive, to 500 kilometers an hour, where I'm fighting to keep it straight, to 1,500 kilometers an hour, where I'm hardly touching the steering wheel. And all of that change will happen at about 30 seconds.
Wow.
We think. That's the best that the modelling can do.
And Andy, I was just looking at photographs of the Bloodhound. The cockpit looks very snug. So is it reminiscent of your fighting plane days? So?
Well, I designed the cockpit very much to have the layout and feel and function
Yep.
of a jet fighter, but it's got the same same sort of electronic screens that a jet fighter would have, because I'm using the same sort of quantities of information.
Yep.
We have 3 engines. We have a jet fighter engine, plus we have the rocket motor, plus we have the Jaguar piston engine that's driving the rocket pump.
Yep.
So each one of those has cooling and oil pressures, and so a whole lot of things to check there before we set off.
Yep.
And then there's the various other coolant temperatures and hydraulics, brakes, etc. And then the center screen, which is the speed and the engine power outputs,
Yep.
which I actually use to control the car. And everything else is the buttons on the steering wheel.
Yep.
Just like a jet fighter, all the controls are on actually on the stick and the throttle.
Yep.
It's exactly the same thing. Everything on the steering wheel, a bit like a Formula One car.
Yep.
In terms of the size, people look at it and say, well, that's absolutely tiny.
Yep.
I think it's quite big,
Yep.
because the average jet fighter cockpit is small,
Okay.
and racing car cockpits are even smaller.
Yep.
So by comparison, we have a 13.5 metre long supersonic land speed record car, and the centrepiece of the cockpit is the carbon fibre monocoque.
Yeah.
200 kilos of carbon fibre.
Yeah.
It's the largest and strongest monocoque in the history of motorsport.
And you know, the way we see it or the way we imagine it would be, you know, it's all blurred vision and, you know, things are moving around. Is it actually like that when you're on a run?
Exactly the opposite. The tricky bit is there's so much to do in a short space of time. From a standing start, the car will be at the other end of a 20-kilometre track 2 minutes later, having hit 1,600 kilometres an hour in the middle. And again, 1,600 kilometres an hour is incredibly difficult to imagine. It's a kilometre in 2.2 seconds. It's 4.5 football pitches in 1 second. So right from the start, I'm monitoring and watching a whole lot of other things, as well as coping with the steering changes and trying to ignore this huge noise from the jet engine and then the supersonic shock waves, as well as ignoring the acceleration of the G, you know, 2G acceleration. So I have to shut all of that out, the noise and the G and the disorientation and fighting the steering and focus on getting exactly the right speed and making sure everything's working all the way through that 2-minute run.
So at what stage of completion is the car?
The car is now just over half built.
Okay.
We've got about 6 to 9 months more work to finish the car, so by the middle of 2015 the car will be ready.
Okay.
We'll then do some low speed, 300 kilometre an hour testing in the UK.
Okay.
And immediately then we'll fly the car out to South Africa and we'll start building the speed up. And that's the bit where I'll start to learn how the steering will handle, you know, how noisy the cockpit's going to be with the jet engine, the shock waves, how the rocket motor performs, what it feels like to accelerate at 60 kilometres an hour per second in this car. Check all of that.
But setting a record is not the sole target of the project. As Andy told me, the aim is far more noble.
You know, Bloodhound is not just a land speed record programme. The target audience is 12 years old and hasn't quite realised how exciting engineering and science is yet. That's where we want to bring it to life and make it exciting. The difference, the unique thing we're doing this time, because modern technology has allowed us to do this, is that we've got 12 video cameras on the car and we've got over 300 sensors and we're transmitting the video pictures and the data live from the car via a purpose-built network. We're transmitting that and relaying it onto the internet and just give people a chance to see some of the technology, see some of the videos and see the magic of science and technology that is the world's first 1,600 kilometre an hour car.